passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Franchise Euphoria. 2017 is upon us. And, back in September 2016, I think around the end of September, I wrote a blog post called The 4 Biggest Mistakes New Franchisors Make and How to Avoid Them. And I'd encourage you to go back and check out that blog post, especially as it relates to this podcast today. The first mistake that I spoke of in that blog post was people make the mistake of not understanding what it means to turn your business into a franchise. The second mistake people make when they turn their business into a franchise is they don't actively plan on how to grow their franchise system. Mistake number 3 is that they don't seek the appropriate trademark protections for the name of the franchise and for other intellectual property considerations for the franchise. And number 4, they don't develop a comprehensive training program for new franchisees. So those are the 4 big mistakes, or 4 of the biggest mistakes that I see. But today's episode, we're going to focus on mistake number 1, and that is not understanding what it means to turn your business into a franchise. And so this is one of those things that comes up over and over again in my world when I meet with people and speak with people about turning their business into a franchise. There's a lot of confusion about that. People don't exactly know what that means, other than, people see a lot of their favorite restaurants and retailers and service providers that are franchised. And so the idea is at the forefront of their thoughts, but they don't really know what that means. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into that mistake number 1 that I highlighted back in that previous blog post, the 4 biggest mistakes new franchisors make and how to avoid them. And that is, how can you better understand what it means to turn your business into a franchise before you do it? Look, the goal of this podcast and, the goal of my practice in general is not to just franchise as many people as possible, but it's to do it in a way that's going to give you the best opportunity for success. As we all know, there's no guarantee for success in anything that we do, but all we can do is position ourselves in the best way that we think possible and then build from there. Well, it's the same thing with franchising. And when you're at a stage in your business where you're thinking about growing your business and capitalizing on the franchise model, you have to have a very clear understanding of what that entails. So I've sort of highlighted for today's episode 5 things that I want you to think about in terms of before you decide to turn your business into a franchise. And number 1 is the legal structuring, right? I mean, you've got to have a franchise disclosure document, a franchise agreement. You've got to have all associated agreements. Number 2, the corporate structure. Is your structure for your business the same structure that you're going to have for your franchise? Number 3, all the intellectual property considerations for your franchise. Number 4, the internal infrastructure of your business, i.e. your team members and how you're going to add to your organization to account for your franchise system. And number 5, the changing role that you as an entrepreneur are going to encounter as you become a franchisor. So let's dive in a little bit deeper to those 5 considerations here for this episode. And number 1, the legal structure. So when you decide you want to become a franchise, it is certainly not as easy as just going out there and telling people you are a franchise. In fact, I would highly recommend you don't do that, because there are federal regulations and state regulations in many states that would prohibit you from doing that. But one of the first things that you need to factor in is, what kind of legal setup do I need as a franchise? Well, under the federal law, franchising is overseen by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and they have certain guidelines that you as a business owner and soon to be franchisor need to abide by. And part of that is you have to have what's called a franchise disclosure document. And within that franchise disclosure document is 23 mandated items that essentially tell the consumers about your business. And so putting that together is certainly a process if done the right way. And within the franchise disclosure documents are included your franchise agreements and other associated agreements that you're likely going to want to have as part of your franchise system and your franchise protections. Because remember, when you are growing your business through a franchise model, what you're essentially doing is you're bringing on franchisees who are going to have their own ownership stake in their local franchise business, but they're going to be doing it in accordance with their legal contract, their franchise agreement. So you got to make sure that that franchise agreement contains the things that you want it to contain so that you can protect your brand, your processes, your intellectual property, and all the like. And that's obviously the first thing you really, really need to think about is what's that going to look like and who can help me achieve that. Number two is your corporate documents. I hear from a lot of business owners that have started a business and they've grown a business, but when they first started, they just literally just formed a company and didn't think twice about it because, frankly, they didn't really have anything at that time. And that's certainly understandable. But what happens is you sort of set it and forget it. And so now you've set up a business and you really haven't gone back and taken a look at whether that structure is the proper structure for you to now grow through a franchise model. So it's really important to take a look at your corporate structure. How are you set up? Are you an LLC? Are you a corporation? Are you an S Corp? Are you a partnership? I mean, all sorts of varieties out there, but taking a look at that structure with the right professionals and understanding that that's really important as you launch into a franchise model. Number three, and this is one of those things that is, I think, often overlooked, and that's the intellectual property component of setting up a good franchise systems. And mostly that involves trademarks, copyrights, sometimes patents, but oftentimes trademarks and copyrights, and making sure that you have those appropriately registered and federally registered. I think there's a big misnomer out there that just because if you have information on your website or you have an operations manual and it says, C with a circle around it or an R for registered, that somehow you are able to garner federal protection from that. You are, but it's somewhat limited. And so there's a lot of reasons as to why for your important intellectual property, you want to consider making sure that your brand, your trademarks, and some of your important documented materials are appropriately protected on a federal level, because you certainly get more protections from the federal registrations. Number four, when we talk about the internal infrastructure, I think this perhaps is the biggest mistake that I see people making when they're going to franchise their business. They forget, or they don't think about the fact, because frankly, there's a lot of other things to be thinking about, that when you become the franchise and now you start selling franchises, you have to now have the infrastructure within your own corporate structure that's going to be able to handle the inquiries from the franchisees, dealing with prospective franchisees, going through the process and the sales process of bringing a new franchisee on, dealing with the training, the ongoing training, helping people and helping these franchisees through problems that they may encounter, whether it's with technology or with the system itself. I mean, this takes time, this takes forethought, and this takes a team to do that. And oftentimes people don't think about that, or they underestimate how much time that's actually going to take. And it's important because you don't want to drive yourself into a position where you're running in 17 different directions every day. Certainly that's not why you want to turn your business into a franchise. And at the same time, you want to be in a position where you can show the added value to the franchisees and make them continuously see why they became a part of your system. So it's important, as you're going through the process of franchising your business, to think about what kind of infrastructure you're going to need. And typically the best time to think about that, in my opinion, is while you're going through the legal setup of your structure. You may not know exactly how your franchise is going to be laid out, but you should certainly be thinking about what it is and what roles you're going to be taking and what roles other people on your team are going to be taking as you go forward in the future to identify gaps and holes that you need to plug with other team members. Number 5, and this is a psychological element of turning your business into a franchise, really getting into the psychology of the franchisor, and that is you're going to now change or need to change your mentality from thinking about your, few locations or possibly even one location to now thinking about your overall brand. So now you, as the entrepreneur turned franchisor, need to be less concerned with the one business you've been running, and now you've got to be concerned about the entire system that you're running. And frankly, that takes time to do. It's not as though you can just switch a switch and all of a sudden you're in that proper mindset. But I see that a lot with entrepreneurs turned franchisors, that there is a learning curve when you go through the process of turning your business into a franchisor, where you tend to fall back on the tendencies that you've always had. And what you need to be doing is thinking more globally as to the whole system, how you can be bettering the system, how you can be providing more value, how you can be attracting the right kind of franchisees. So all that stuff is important. Obviously, there's way more to cover on all of these topics, but hopefully this was insightful and helpful for you today. If you're out there with a business and you're thinking about tweaking it or looking into the franchise model, these are some things that you really must consider, in my opinion, before you do so. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.